Today's guest came to prominence over the last 2 years when she became a powerful voice against COVID lockdowns and mandates. Beginning in April 2020, standing on the west steps of the Sacramento Capitol. Prior to that, she'd spent 28 years litigating for Fortune 500 companies. All of that changed, though, in 2013 when her career took a major turn and she began fighting child sex slavery abroad, focusing on Southeast Asia. Human rights attorney Leigh Dundas. Leigh, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Now, every time I've done an interview on human trafficking and especially child sex trafficking, I always say the same thing. It's an incredibly uncomfortable topic, but one that I think we need to have and need to keep having to make others aware of what's going on. Do you think people understand the magnitude of what's happening?
No, I actually really think they're not fully aware of it. I mean, it's human nature when something is uncomfortable or gory or sad, to not want to linger there, to not want to explore it further. So I think most Christian, well bred, law abiding, good citizens, not just in America, but worldwide, have a bit of a natural aversion to really understanding the topic, because to really understand the topic really takes a lot of intestinal fortitude and takes you to very dark places. I don't know how much your viewership is familiar, but it is 150 billion with a B billion-dollar a year industry, and 40 million with an M are currently enslaved. And those numbers are so vast that it almost defies sort of putting a context to it. But for a reference point, we have about 40 million people in the state of California right now. And 90% of those who are trafficked are female, often younger than 18. And 89% of those actions involve sexual servitude, sexual acts of some sort. So even if they're working for Nike, or a supplier to Nike making t-shirts, or, mining lithium or something in an African mine, a lot of times sex gets thrown into the mix. So when you look at that demographic, to give you a comparison standard, it would be like all of California waking up tomorrow enslaved, handcuffed to a bed, being raped 7, 8, 9, 10 times a night for profit. That is what the face of human trafficking looks like worldwide today. And it's a very frightening, almost unconfrontable topic for most people, but confront it we really have to do, because unless we go there, nothing's going to get any better.
And you mentioned people that work for Nike or are mining for lithium. Do you think it's a misconception that all human trafficking is automatically about sex?
It is. It is. And I work a lot in Asia, which, of course, you have the Asian brothel connotation that immediately pops to most people's minds, courtesy of Hollywood and what little they have read. But a lot of the traffickings we see in South Asia and India and Southeast Asia involves men who are 24 years old, and they are stuck on a shrimping boat, and they are literally worked to death. They're worked 16, 18, 20 hours a day, or kids in Africa who are made to fish on lakes or go into mines. And again, they are worked, 16, 18, 19 hours a day with no break, with no days off, with no school, with no anything. And it's a very sad existence. I mean, whether you're enslaved and being beaten and forced to do manual labor, or being raped, I think we can all agree, 100% of good people can agree, that is an existence in on either hand that we wouldn't wish on our worst enemy. And the unfortunate reality is a lot of the world's children, and or vulnerable populations, women, young men, are being forced into these dangerous, scary, high risk servitude situations.
And how big is the problem here in the US?
Um, it's a good question. I do a lot of my work in Asia, so I haven't, and then 2 years ago I got dragged into the freedom fight, so I've not had my finger on the pulse so much by the numbers here in America. But what I can tell you is the average age at which youth are trafficked here in America is about 11 or 12, and according to FBI statistics, and this is 10, 15 years ago now, they released a study that showed the average life expectancy once a child is first turned out sexually, pimped out by a trafficker, if you will, is about 7 years. So if you do the math, you rapidly realize that these children are dead or dying by the age of majority by the time they can legally vote. And that involves death by John, a violent customer, death by pimp, a violent seller. Oh, you didn't make me enough money, I'm going to beat you. And, the guy kicks and ruptures her spleen and leaves her to bleed to death, or, whatever it is. And death by AIDS. A lot of the women that we see who are mama sans, who are controlling the brothels for the mafia owners, but they're the day-to-day manager in Asia. What you recognize is these aren't girls who said, oh, I want to run a brothel when I grow up. I mean, they had hopes and dreams just like ours. I want to own a store, or I want to, go work here in this big city and do this and make money. And instead they were enslaved, and they were just lucky. And by lucky, I mean they didn't die of AIDS. And so they aged out of the age bracket that is alluring to pedophiles, but they're not dead and they don't know anything else, and they're still stuck in a brothel town. So what do? They become the mama san. They never wanted to be in charge of selling young girls to pedophiles. They used to be that young girl, but they don't know a different way of life. Their family in Asia, once the family sells them into the brothel, you're damaged goods. So even though the family sold you and you get your freedom one day because an NGO like ours comes in to rescue you, you can't send the girls back because the family will treat them as damaged goods. And so literally these poor kids, once they're rescued, or young women, have nowhere to go. They can't go back to where they came from because they're lepers amongst their own town or society, and they don't have any other skills because literally from the time they were 7 until whatever age you rescue them, they have been on their backs and on all fours in brothels, and the only thing they know is systemic rape on a nightly basis. So the numbers are staggering. It really defies credulity, but it is the fastest growing crime in the world. It's the second largest crime in the world. And any town in America that says, oh, we don't have that problem here, is lying. If you have a motel in your town or a hotel in your town, you have a problem. The new brothels are the motels. Your sex trafficker doesn't have a red light outside his house on the bad side of the tracks and bad side of town. He just goes to the Travel Lodge or the Motel 6, rents a room, and puts 6, 7, 8 girls that he has stolen in that room and runs a Backpage ad or whatever the new replacement for Backpage is. And he rents those girls until they die. It's a very sad existence. And it is permeating every aspect of American life and every aspect of life the world over.
In 2016, I was having lunch with somebody, and he was heavily involved with a few organizations that work predominantly over here, but also overseas. And I felt so ignorant when I found out how huge the problem was here in the US. I just didn't know. And so we sat there over this lunch going through it all, and my mind was blown, and I've never looked at things the same way. So it brings me to 2 more questions about the US, which is, what sort of issues are the southern border situation that's happening? I mean, the Democrats are saying that the border is closed. The Republicans are saying the border is wide open, but no matter which side you sit on, the fact is we have millions of people pouring into the US who are illegal, undocumented. What is that doing to this industry?
Well, you summed it up quite nicely. The border, if you go down there, if you talk to people who've actually had eyes on it, the border is porous. We've got more people coming over than really at any other point in history. And a lot of those are unaccompanied minors. And we all know what happens to children who don't have an adult actually looking out for them, whether they were intended to be sold or traded into sexual servitude or slavery situations is really not the question. They will be. I mean, you asked what contributes to the problem here in America. Separate from the border, prior to 2020, most of these kids that you see trafficked in America came from troubled homes. They're being raped by their dad or stepdad or uncle or grandpa or a neighbor or the Boy Scout leader or the PTA president. And they end up running away, and they end up in foster care or group homes or out on the streets. And the odds are, if you're out on the street for more than like 48 hours, you're going to be approached by a sex trafficker. These guys have radar for unaccompanied minors. So when you have coyotes coming over the border with unaccompanied youth, when you have plane loads full of people being delivered into various cities, including Martha's Vineyard. Go DeSantis. You have even adults. I mean, even Hispanic adults who don't speak the language are vulnerable. They're vulnerable to being put in a sweatshop in El Monte and forced to sew garments for a living and never let out of the house. I mean, there was a case just like that 10 years ago, right down the road here in Southern California. So it is a problem when you have any vulnerable population, but of course the most vulnerable are children, and our border is wide open right now. The other side of that equation is, I do a lot of work in Southeast Asia. The town I work in is on the Thailand-Malaysia border, and across the river in Malaysia is a bunch of radicalized Muslim insurgent training bombing camps. So all the Mideast bombers you see, they have camps that train them how to do that. Some of those camps now line the river that separate Malaysia from Thailand. So we're working in a brothel town called Sungai Kelak on the Thai side of the border that has 140 child brothels in it and nothing else. And as if these girls don't have enough to worry about, across the river are radicalized jihadists who are practicing their bombing trade by bombing the hell out of the brothels and using the brothels over the river as target practice. We had 330 bombs go off in that region the first year I did work down there in 2013, and the situation is not much different today. They use the girls as bombing practice. Those same jihadi rebels, these radicalized insurgent bomber crowds, are now traveling to Mexico intentionally, knowing that they can walk over the border or get a helping hand over the border. Thank you, Biden and federal government. And they are flowing into our society. So separate from the trafficking problem, you've got radicalized jihadi types who are looking to bomb things, who are now present in America that were never here prior to that. They weren't here on President Trump's watch or even any of the earlier administrations, really.
The whole situation you just described in Thailand bordering Malaysia and the bombs, I mean, people like us, we can read about it, we can be empathetic to what's going on, but really that defies any sort of belief that we can logically come up with, because it's not anything we have ever had to live with. And I can't imagine being there or even seeing the carnage of all of that. And I will get to all the incredible work that you did in Southeast Asia, but I just wanted to ask a couple of other questions. So what are your opinions here in the US of sentencing laws for people that are found guilty of child sex offenses or human trafficking? And I ask this because as I was preparing, I was reading an article that was released yesterday about a Fresno man who was found with more than 1,000 child pornography videos. He was jailed for 180 days and 2 years probation. He is going to be registered as a sex offender. But for me as a citizen, that doesn't seem like it's enough.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not enough. I mean, in many instances, and for a long time, really before the last 10 or 15 years, we had a model here in America where we arrested the victim, the child prostitute. By the way, there is no such thing as a child prostitute. If you're under the age of consent and you can't consent to sex, how can you consent to being raped against your will? But we called them child prostitutes. We arrested the victim. We let the guy selling her go free. And often we let the buyer go free. Or, a real big thing around the turn of the century in the 90s is we'd send them to John school. It's like, what is that, like traffic school? You get a slap on the wrist for buying a child for sex, like you do for blowing a stop sign. I mean, just incredible, the non-existent sentencing or very light sentencing that made a mockery of the fact that this child was systemically exploited. And the irony is, I don't even know where to go with it, because if you had a bad guy, a Ted Bundy, kidnap a 7-year-old out of an elementary school, out of second or third grade, rape her overnight, even once, and he got found out, he would be put away for rape. But we have a person who buys and sells the child, you enter money into the transaction, and now all the players who helped buy and sell that child go free, and the child is the one doing time. I mean, it was insanity. And I remember trying to remember the statistic. I don't think I can, but it was something like in the first 10 years of this century, we had arrested something like thousands of children here in California who were under the age of 18 for being rape victims. And two of whom I think were like 8 and 9 years old. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I can understand as a cop if you bust a 17-year-old and she's got high heels on and makeup and you think she's an adult turning tricks voluntarily and you're treating her as a prostitute. My child at the time I learned this statistic was in third grade. I'm like, there is no amount of makeup and high heels you can put on an 8-year-old that makes them look like an adult. So if you're a cop and you're arresting an 8-year-old, I mean, you're the one who should be really flogged and lynched, in my opinion. But Sweden has done it right. If you don't know the Swedish model, let me give you the quickie version. Sweden made the buying of sex, whether it was underage or not, the equivalent of a felony here in the United States. And what that did is it completely stopped all trading of women and girls for sex, whether they were over the age of 18 or under the age of 18, because all the pimps were like, I don't want to go away for 10 years if I get caught. I'm going to go to Amsterdam or I'm going to go to America where I get a slap on the wrist and it ain't no big thing. Another model that's been very effective, in addition to criminalizing the hell out of the buying and selling of sex like Sweden did, who, by the way, has a 51% female legislature that did that, was the St. Petersburg model. In St. Petersburg, Florida, some years ago, they started a name and shame program where when they arrested men who bought sex in a sting in the area, they put their face and their name on a billboard. And they also coupled that with a Dear Mrs. John letter that said, hello, Mrs. John Dear, or whatever your last name is. We thought you'd like to know that your husband was arrested for trying to buy commercial sex on Friday night. And you might want to route yourself to the nearest AIDS clinic for a full STD panel because your guy's going down for buying sex, which is against the law. And the combination of those Dear Mrs. John letters, along with putting the guy who'd been busted, his name and his face up there, dropped trafficking and illegal buying of sex in the region by, I think it was 25, it might have been 50%, like overnight. So when you actually criminalize the crime and when you broadcast the criminal's name, these accountants, these architects, these teachers, these scout leaders, these pastors who are caught, all of a sudden the men who might otherwise be thinking about buying sex think twice and they go, maybe I won't do that today because I don't want to go down there and lose my license, spend 10 years in jail and have my whole family's name dragged through the mud because I look like the pedophile that I am.
So all of that brings me to the Epstein case. And I'm curious, as an attorney and as someone that fights in this industry, your thoughts on this. So the whole world agrees that Epstein is guilty, right? That's not even up for debate. He never made it to trial, but we know he was found guilty the first time, even though he appeared to be in jail. He was never really jailed properly, and that was in Florida. Then we have Ghislaine Maxwell. She has stood trial. It was all while we knew it was happening and there were little sort of headlines that hit the mainstream media, it wasn't something that was the top story or the leading story on the news every night. And yet at the same time, we had the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial being broadcast live for everybody to watch, every single solitary detail. So we get to the end of the Maxwell case. There is evidence that has never been made public, and the Black Book has never been made public, which people have been screaming for and saying, well, we have a right to know. The big takeaway at the end of all of this is Epstein is guilty. Ghislaine Maxwell is guilty of aiding and abetting, at the very least, with what Epstein was doing. But yet no law enforcement agency is tracking down the other people that were involved, because it was certainly more than two people, considering the scale of which this was all going on. And nobody is pursuing anyone that was buying or on the receiving end of these human beings.
Yeah, and that's a problem. You're absolutely right. You don't have that well entrenched of a sex trafficking operation and only run it with two very busy, otherwise high profile people. There were, I am sure, people who did their bidding and were paid to do their bidding and knew exactly what was going on. And none of those have been brought to trial, to my knowledge. None of the clients, the names of the people who frequented the island have really been made public, other than you see a post here and there on Facebook, but in a formal sort of setting. And that is the problem. I mean, people say all the time, they say, oh, sex trafficking is awful. And I'm like, it is awful. And the people who sell children are awful. But make no mistake, if there were nobody buying, these people would be selling cocaine again. So when we give the buyers a pass, and those buyers are cops and lawyers and judges and, multi-millionaire, billionaire guys with their own jets and heads of state and highly elected officials in our own political system, we are contributing to the continuation of the problem. Because as long as you have demand, you will have somebody selling to meet the demand. Yes, Epstein was horrible. Yes, Maxwell was horrible. But where are those clients and why are they not being prosecuted? They are equally culpable, if not more so. And, Maxwell, give me a break. This is a woman who looked like you and me, was probably a little older than you and me, and she had her submariner's license. How many women like us do you know who have a submarine license? How exactly do you think they get, vulnerable youth on and off the island? Well, I don't know. Epstein's girlfriend had her submarine license. Why don't we start there? So many facts about this case were not made public and need to be made public. Again, you can't confront and eradicate evil if you don't know who's doing it, where it is, and who was involved. And that is why we have a criminal justice system. I mean, deterrence is one of the reasons we have that. People look at that and they go, oh, that guy got lynched or hung or shot because he was a serial killer. Maybe I should think twice about being a serial killer when I grow up. Or, wow, that hurt to have my hand slapped that hard and spend 10 years in jail. Maybe I won't boost cars anymore when I get out or steal airplanes for the cartel or whatever. But when you give no sentence and you give no data and you distract the American public with a Hollywood trial, you're really contributing and exploiting the injustice as opposed to helping eradicate it.
And it just reminds me of the Heidi Fleiss case back in the day when she was on trial. And from what I got from that trial, every woman that was a participant in that was a willing participant. They made the choice to do the work that they were doing. But the media were frothing at the bit to get the names out of that black book.
Black book?
Why are they not doing the same for this? That is the part that just sticks with me. And I know sticks with a lot of others because it's all over social media where the general public are asking the questions that the media and the authorities, in my opinion, should be asking.
Well, it's a really good question, but he who controls the narrative controls all or a whole damn lot. I remember when the it wasn't Amber Alert, it was the Megan's Law went into effect early 2000s, and we started registering sex offenders. And somebody made a little database, and you could enter in your address and your zip code, and you could see, because there'd be all these little red dots that would pop up around your house, where the rapist lived. And they had like 4 different colors. It was like yellow, orange, red, and purple. And the purple was like the serial violent rapist. And, the least exciting color was the kid who turned 18 and was having sex with his 17-year-old girlfriend and got caught for statutory rape, but is probably really not a threat to most of society, right? And we put in, my husband and I were like, oh, let's put in our address. And we put in our address, and my husband, who's fairly naive compared to me on all things sexual violence, sex trafficking related, goes, oh, look, there's no little bubbles by us, because we live in an area of Orange County in the hills, nicer area. And then there's the 55 freeway, which sort of divides the hills from the flatter area. And Santa Ana's over here, which is not as nice of an area. And so there's all these little bubbles all over Santa Ana. I mean, purple and red and yellow. It's scary. You're like, wow, I'm never going to go to Santa Ana again unless I get raped. And then there's like nothing. And there's a couple spots on my side of the freeway. But as you get up into the foothills, the higher net worth houses, the nicer area, there's no bubbles at all. And my husband's like, looks like we live in a safe neighborhood. I just laughed out loud. I go, no, honey, there's just as many dots here. The only difference is the people buying and selling kids and raping kids on our side of the freeway are cops and lawyers and judges. And here's a little tidbit. They don't fucking arrest themselves.
Right.
So if you are the president, hypothetically, of a country, or you are the attorney general, or you are the head of the FBI or the local police station or a cop, you're never going to get your name in that Rolodex out to the masses, because the last thing you want is that black book made public. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. To the extent you're not getting the names out of the black book, that tells you that very powerful people who still control the media narrative and the courts are in control and not letting that come out because their name's going to be in it and they don't want that kind of heat.
It's so terrifying, but this is why I keep making a point of having this conversation. So now I want to go back in time. You were litigating for Fortune 500 companies. You had an incredible practice going, and I imagine that was good work, well-paying work. And in 2013, that all changed. So can you tell us about that?
Well, I had been litigating for the better part of the decade after I got out of law school, but then I had a kid, helped my husband with his business, did the mom thing. But yeah, in 2013, we actually sold the office my husband had, and we had a little bit of time, a little bit of money together, which most of the time you have more time than money or more money than time, but we had a little of both that year, and we decided we would go traveling. And I got bored, and we got to Australia, which is where you're from, is it not?
It is.
Yeah, we were visiting folks that we knew down in Sydney, and it was all fun and games for the first week. And then we'd actually enrolled my daughter in school down there. We were planning on staying, the rest of it. It was March 4th when we arrived, 2013, and we planned to stay for the rest of the year. So we enrolled her in a little school down there. She had a little parochial school uniform, and they wear the hats with the little things in back and little skirts and a little necktie. It looked very English looking, and I got bored, after the first week, after all the fun and games were over. So I thought, well, I've always wanted to help fight sex trafficking, fight sexual violence, fight bad guys, rapists, whatever, child abusers. I'm just going to call up some nonprofits that work down here. And I'm a lawyer. I've got some skills that I like to think I have. I'll just volunteer my time and offer to help. And the conversations were very predictable after the first two or three. They said, wait, you're a Caucasian lady from Orange County, California with an 8-year-old. You're vacationing in Australia, and you're a lawyer who represented Fortune 500 companies, and you want to bust brothels in Asia for a living. Bye-bye. They just laughed. They're like, click, click, click. But finally I got through to a nonprofit that was actually opening a Southeast Asia office. They had their executive crew. They were run by pastors out of Australia. It was Nick and Christine Kane, A21 campaign. It stands for Abolishing 21st Century Slavery. So there I am, an American living in Australia. Nick and Chris Kane had moved from Australia to Newport, right in my backyard, to do church work. And then when she was planning a church in Greece, she saw all these missing women photos in the terminal at the Greece airport, and was like, how can all these thousands of kids be missing? Like, how many kidnappers do you have in Greece? And somebody said, hey, it's not that, it's sex trafficking. And that really opened her eyes to the problem. So they created a nonprofit alongside their church work to do the child rescue work. And they happened to be coming to Asia to get their feet wet on the Asia trafficking scene, because they'd been doing a lot of rescues in Europe and Eastern Europe and Greece. And I met them when they were in Vietnam, fell in love with the work their organization was doing. I volunteered my time working my way through Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, just helping, for free. And when I came home, they offered me a job as general counsel to their nonprofit. And what it really meant is, I was doing the legal work for the nonprofit, but basically I agreed to open up their Southeast Asia office in Thailand. So I was living and working in Thailand 2 weeks, 2 weeks in Asia, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks in Asia, 2 weeks there. At the same time, I had a third grader in the house here in Orange County. And it was very exciting work. It was very draining work. But it was the most beautiful work I've ever done, because when you really feel like you're getting a 7-year-old or a 17-year-old away from a pedophile, so they're not going to be continually raped anymore, and you can get them rehabilitated, that is worth its weight in gold. So that's what I started doing a decade ago almost.
You talked earlier about the life expectancy of these girls or these children that are put into this industry.
Yeah.
Do they have any chance of survival if organizations like the one that you work with, Project Rescue Children, Tim Ballard's organization, Project Underground Railway,
Operation Underground Railroad.
Yeah. Without any of those organizations, do these kids stand a chance of getting out alive?
No, they don't. And a lot of people ask, why did you spend your time, as a person who's obviously not Asian, going into the most war-torn brothel towns that are getting bombed separately because of a religious war. Like, why would you go there? America has a trafficking problem. And I've said this over and over. I said, look, it's really not fair to compare, because every child being trafficked, whether it's one time for one night or 10,000 times for 10 years, every child, every woman is worthy of rescue. But the reality is that the rescue market here in America has a lot of good people doing a lot of good work. The number of people going into the Thailand, Malaysia border area, when I started doing the work, we were it. My organization was it, with the pastor that we worked with out of Chiang Mai. And when you see, like, A21 was, like I said, they were doing rescues in Greece and Europe, and we would get 17-year-olds who had sweet talked their buyer, who was an American kid who went on his gap year or graduated grad school or went with his fraternity brothers and buddies on a Europe trip, and they got drunk in Amsterdam or in Greece. And one of their guys was like, hey, let's go to a brothel. And they said, okay. And they all went, and they were, pardon my French, shit faced. They're not bad kids. They got peer pressured by one who had a bad idea to go to a brothel. And they end up in a room with a 16 or 17-year-old girl who may speak English because she was raised in Europe. A lot of, regardless of where in Europe you're raised, English is a very common second or third language for kids to know. And you got a guilty feeling 17, 19, 20-year-old American kid who was raised to go to church and do your chores and is actually a fairly good kid. And the woman goes, I'm not here because I want to be here. I'm against my will. Will you lend me your cell phone so I can make a call for help? That happens. Or the guy goes, I'll open the window, run away, and I'll hold off the mama sign. We rescue girls like that all the time. And they're very rescuable because they're 16 or 17. And they thought they were going to be a waitress in Greece, but their recruiter stole their paperwork and tied them to a bed and made them be in a brothel. But when you get them, they're old enough to be vocationally rehabbed. They don't need to be placed with a family because they're basically an adult. They can live in a group setting. They can get group therapy. You can give them some vocational skills, and they can fly. They can go make a life for themselves, and they have a chance of rescue because they can sweet talk a John out of a cell phone. The situation in Asia is entirely different. We are talking 2-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds that are in these brothels. We are talking a hardcore pedophile, a dentist in Chicago who has spent the last year researching where he could go to buy a little boy for this or a little girl for this, depending on what weird sex stuff he's into, who has gotten a relief doctor to cover his practice for a month. And that guy takes a one-way plane into Cambodia and buys a virgin for $300 US that is going to be his for a day, a night, a week, a month, to rape at will. That 7-year-old is never going to sweet talk that hardcore pedophile out of his cell phone. First of all, she doesn't speak his language. Second of all, even if she did and he said, oh my God, I feel bad, here's my cell phone, make it cry for help, that girl's never seen a cell phone. She came out of Sawanika, Laos. She came out of a rice paddy that is still communist to this day and has never even seen that kind of technology before. Even if she knew how to work a phone, she doesn't speak Thai. She doesn't know the 911 phone number in Thailand to place a call. And even if you got rid of all those barriers for her, she is going to call the police station. And on a scale of corruption, Thailand ranks 4 or 5 every year because the cops are the ones working for the mafia as bouncers on their moonlight job. So when she finally gets through, if she ever does, to the police station, she's going to tell her little sob story, and the cop's going to go, where are you? That's great. Yeah, I'll come rescue you. And he's just going to rape her some more. So yes, it's a long answer to your question, but without the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations and nonprofits who are doing the work in India, in Thailand, in Cambodia, these girls don't have a rat's chance in HE double toothpicks of getting rescued. And they are the most vulnerable in my mind because of their age, because of their language barrier, because of their technology barrier, and because their parents sold them. So even when we rescue them, they have nowhere to go back to. So for me, for my use of time, I choose to spend it on the most vulnerable, without which and they would have no hope of rescue.
And these children, when you get them out, the ones in Asia, where do you place them?
Well, I can tell you that the very first thing I did on the job for A21 campaign is we were going into Thailand. We executed a memorandum of understanding with the Thai government, their anti-trafficking organization, which was the only part of the Royal Thai Police Force that was not corrupt, or it was the least corrupt. And as part and parcel of that memorandum of understanding, we said we have carte blanche ability to operate our undercover crews of former SWAT, former Navy SEAL type guys in your jurisdiction without interference from your government or the police. When we decide to bust a brothel, you won't interfere. We will coordinate with you, but we're not going to tell you a week out, because then if you have a snitch, you're going to let the bad guys know. They'll be gone before we get there. And we'll basically let you know as we're going in or after we've gone in, not before really we've gone in. And once we get the girls out, all the time prior to that, the girls that we recovered had to be put in the state-run rehabilitation center, which was on an island in the middle of a river. And when you would send a reporter in once every 10 years to interview the sex slaves that were getting rehabilitated at this country, government-run rehab center, the girls would say, "Oh my gosh, you're a reporter? Can you get me out of here? Can I go back to the brothel?"
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they were wanting to go back to the brothel. That's how bad the rehab center was. So we were like, look, we're not going to help fix your trafficking problem in Thailand, only to put the girls that we rescue back into it, from the frying pan into the fire. We're going to send them to organizations, rehab facilities that we are either directly running or are run by a sister organization like International Justice Mission, IJM, or OUR, somebody that we trust, that we know will be doing actual rehab work and not re-trafficking the girl that we just got out of the trafficking situation. But yeah, it's a very dicey scene in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of different layers and complexities that aren't present here. I mean, yeah, it's hard to find a girl a bed in certain cities in America, especially if she's addicted to drugs, and they all are. That's how the pimps keep them sedated, sleeping during the day and awake at night as they hook them on uppers and downers, and it keeps the customers happy. So it's rare to rescue any victim, whether it's in Asia or here, that's not drug addicted. But at least in America, there's a lot more choices for us to route girls to, even though it's not perfect. It's a probable thing that you're going to get a bed for a girl if you just persist. In Asia, it is really difficult. So you can't just go in like a cowboy and go, "I'm going to throw a girl over my shoulder and take her out." Well, okay, now what? Where are you going to put her? She needs a rape kit. She needs to be treated for her STDs. She needs mental counseling. She may need drug withdrawal, oversight. And she's 7 years old, and you can't send her back to her parents because they're the ones who sold her. So now you need a family to basically adopt her, or a group that's going to take care of her for the next decade. It's very, very challenging in Asia.
There aren't words when you're thinking about this situation in that way. And I've spoken to people who run the organizations that take these survivors on and rehabilitate them. There's an incredible one, Miracles Outreach Program in Florida, where they don't age the girls out. So these are generally teenagers that come in, but they work with the girls until the girls are ready to fly essentially on their own. But to think of it with a child, it's
a rough go. Miracle. That's funny you mentioned Miracle. I've actually done a tad bit of work for them. I was in Florida doing a speech, and one of the attendees became a good friend of mine. Her name's Miriam Putnam, and she really helps with their fundraisers every year, is helping them expand their physical facilities. And she told me about Miracle. I said, "Well, I got a day to kill before my flight leaves town. Like, take me out to Miracle. Show me the setup. Let me see if I can, help you guys out." And we did a little bit of work together for Miracle. But you really do need to understand that so many of these youth are in this situation because their family was not trustworthy in the first place. They would not have been vulnerable to falling into a trafficking situation if they'd had a really strong 2-person family with lots of extended family that were normal and nice and not abusive. So regardless of whether you're in Asia or America, the trick is really to get these kids placed in a facility or with a family that is rock solid, super stable, and is going to take care of them for longer than a New York second. You're not doing these girls any favor to give them some hope, only to betray them and be like, "Just kidding, you're 15 now, go out on your own," or "You're 17 now, go out on your own." I mean, These are kids who need a lot of retroactive schooling that they missed, counseling, life skills, how to say please, how to say thank you, how to get along when you're not in a brothel with pedophiles. I mean, there's a lot of just adulting that they need to be shown how to do before you throw them out into society. And if you miss the mark, all you're doing is creating the next generation of vulnerable victims, because they'll go out and they'll get attached to some bad guy and get pregnant and give birth to a child who is now vulnerable and going to be in the same spot her mother was in, 5-10 years prior. So the trick is really to stick with these kids. It's the least we could do. We owe them that.
It really is that generation cycles that we hear so much about, where you've got to go in and break those generational cycles to be able to move forward and to protect your own children moving forward. So you had 7 years before the world turned upside down. What sort of headway do you feel that you were able to make while you were doing this back and forth to Thailand?
Well, we were able to do a lot of good work in Thailand. The work is still going on to this day. And I told you about the nature of that work. It's your standard raids, rescues, rehabilitation, a lot of education as well. We were instrumental in releasing some online platforms here in America that have also been released in other countries now, that teach parents and children how to recognize the signs of a potential trafficker and steer clear. And that is an important part of this piece as well, because, if ever there were a time that the saying, what is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If ever there were a time that was the case, it's in trafficking. If you can educate the parent or the child so that they don't fall prey to the recruiter, you've saved a life before you had to go in and get them out after they've been raped 20 or 2,500 times. I mean, it's just such an easier road to hoe when you get it before it happens as opposed to after. So there's a lot of good work that's been going on that I was privileged to be part of. We did a lot of law enforcement training. We did not just training of local police departments, but also their federal counterparts, CIA, FBI. We did military training, military cops around the world. They all need to understand that you don't just arrest the victim. Quit arresting the girl. The girl did not decide at age 5 she wanted to be a child Lolita or a prostitute. She's guaranteed she wanted to be a dolphin trainer or a seamstress and make cute handbags, or a lawyer. No kid wakes up and wants to be a hooker. So we need to stop arresting these victims. And there's plenty of police departments the world over, including here in the US, who are still arresting the victims and slapping the hand of the bad guy and letting him off with John school. Quit with the John school. Lock him up for 10 years if he was raping a child. So I feel like we've done a lot of headway in terms of training law enforcement how to address the situation correctly. And that is worth its weight in gold also. But one of the more creative initiatives that I was privileged to be part of, at the same time I was meeting A21 and Nick and Chris Kane, I had also met the head of in-house counsel for Bank of New York Mellon Assets. This guy's a lawyer to the biggest bank in the world. BNY Mellon moves $30 trillion a day with a T in money moves. I mean, they are the biggest bank. And this is the head of all the lawyers that keep this bank rolling. And in addition to his day job, this guy writes novels in his spare time. And one of his novels got made into a movie in India. And one day he was there for the making of the film. His assistant came up and said, "Hey, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but I think our lead actor got trafficked." And my friend, this lawyer, goes, "You mean he's caught in Mumbai on a tuk-tuk in traffic?" And the assistant goes, "No, sir, like he's been human trafficked, like slavery." And my friend said, "Oh, I thought Abraham Lincoln got rid of that in America a couple hundred years ago. What are you talking about?" And that was his entry point into the fact that this is a huge, fast-growing criminal economy. So I met this guy at the same time that was all going down. And he and I would get together in Hong Kong when I had a layover, or in, Thailand, and we would talk and we would say, "Look, we're lawyers for banks. I represented Advana. This guy represented, I think, B of A, and now he's working for BNY Mellon." We're like, how are we going to change trafficking before we die? it's not going to be pulling one girl at a time out, because as fast as we pull one out, another one gets sucked into the situation. So what we realized and what we brainstormed about is, when you do a sale of a girl and the pedophile pays you money as the mama son, $300 or $3,000, whatever it is, that money is dirty money. It's the fruit of a criminal transaction, dirty money. And when you, as a criminal, put the money in the bank, that becomes money laundering. Everybody's heard that term, and it's a separate crime. Yeah, you bought a child, that's sex trafficking and rape, whatever. Now you put, the seller sold the child, that's a crime. Now the seller of the child puts the money that the pedophile gave him in a bank, that's money laundering. And not only is it illegal for the mama san to put the money at the end of each night into the bank because it's money laundering, it's also illegal for the bank to take the money if they know it's coming from a cocaine deal or from a sale of a kid to a pedophile. So what we decided to do is start getting the names of all the bad guys together from all the nonprofits, OUR, IJM, ours, a whole bunch, all the ones that are operating worldwide. And we got the names of the bad guys and we put it into a system where those names would go out to an intelligence profiler, Thomson Reuters World Check. They're the group that creates intelligence profiles on everybody. When you go to Bank of America to open a new account and you're sitting there for 10 minutes, that's because they're running your name, Natalie, through the system to make sure that you're a nice, normal lady living in LA and not Ghislaine Maxwell, right? Ghislaine Maxwell. So right now, all those intel profiles on all these bad guys that we're finding the world over are automatically put into the system. And that system automatically sends the profile to every bank and financial institution throughout the world, 7,500 plus banks. Now we have backed the bank into a corner because they get a report that says Joe Blow in Bangkok is a bad guy and he's got an account with you. And either that bank does their due diligence and goes, yep, it's the same Joe Blow. He's running dirty money into our Bangkok branch. At which point, if they find that out, they have to freeze the account assets, all the money in the account. Or they don't do their due diligence, they turn a blind eye to it, and the Department of Justice will fine them a couple billion with a B dollars for knowingly allowing money laundering to occur in their branches. So essentially, this other guy and I have created a system where we back the banks into a corner to be the police arm over the money and freeze the account assets of all of these criminal mafias that are running all of these sex trafficking operations worldwide. And that, my friend, is one of the ways on a macro level that you can address human trafficking and actually have a prayer of stopping a $150 billion a year industry.
And has that been implemented, or is this still, it has been?
It is. And it was, at the beginning, we had a single person sitting at Thomson Reuters that we put there, interfacing with Thomson Reuters, making these intel profiles. Now it's automated. The nonprofits upload, hey, we did a raid last night. Here's the names of the 5 guys who were working in the brothel, along with the 5 sex buying pedophiles. Thomson Reuters just goes, great. These are the names of 10 new bad guys, 5 buyers, 5 sellers. They create intelligence profiles using all their database. And then it is instantaneously, we don't even have to push a button. It's instantaneously, all those intel profiles go out to every bank. So if those 10 guys are banking anywhere in the world, and they all are banking somewhere, instantaneously that bank has to look at their account and freeze it, or risk getting fined for not doing their due diligence and freezing the account.
That's incredibly exciting to hear that such a huge step in this whole thing has been made.
Yeah, it is a very significant step. It's a very technologically, whatever. It's a tech heavy step. It's not something that your average nonprofit is going to be doing. It takes somebody who's thinking with the laws, who's got the legal training, who's got the technology, or the ability to get highly technical people to the table. And, it's 10 years down the road. We were hatching this plan in 2013. Now it's almost 2023. It's been a full decade, but it's going gangbusters. And I'm proud to tell you that 90%, and this is as of 2 years ago, 90% of the names of the bad guys that we're feeding into the system are not already in the system, which tells you we're doing really good work, because we're getting new bad guys that aren't already known bad factors into the system, so that we can get the new bad guys that aren't already on the radar onto the radar and handled.
That's just incredible. Not something I want to dive deeply into, but I just want to ask the question. Working in human trafficking, speaking to Cassiopeia and Brittany Dando from Beyond Duality, speaking to Adam Whittington from Project Rescue Children, they have spoken with me at length about human sacrifice. Is that something that you encountered in Southeast Asia?
Um, not in the way that you've probably had people talk about it. There is not in the ritualistic version. Where you see ritualistic child sacrifice in Southeast Asia is a lot in the hill tribes. So, you know, the ones that wear the really all the jewelry on their neck to make their necks taller. There's very large mountains between China and Thailand, or China and Vietnam, or China and Burma, now Myanmar. And those people are in a no man's land. They're not considered to be citizens of the country they're part of. Even if their tribe resides in Thailand, they're not given Thai citizenship. So they're called hill tribe people. And in some of the more remote areas like that, you will encounter tribes who believe it's the devil's work when twins are born, or it's the devil's work when a child is born handicapped, and they will sacrifice that child for that reason. Or you will see witchcraft, and they will try to sacrifice a child because their crops didn't grow. And you know, that whole kind of thing, what you see in Africa, what you read about in witch books, that whole realm. The ritualized child sexual abuse that you see here, that you hear about with the Masons being involved, that you hear about creating multiple personality disorder from the children who are sold to very high religious figures, political figures. You don't see that so much in Asia, but you are getting children who are sacrificed. It's just a different window in. And as well in Asia, you have things that are very horrific. You have throwing acid in the face of children. You know, we recovered a girl, actually, she'd been recovered before we got to her, and she was hired to be my secretary and undercover person. And I told my intermediary in country, I go, what are you talking about? My operatives always look like Navy SEALs, because they are. And my secretaries who are Thai look like 90-pound Asian women, because they are. You're getting me a secretary / operative? And I'll never forget, the guy goes, just, she'll tell you in her own time. She'll tell you her story. So this was a girl who'd been kidnapped. She was sitting on a bus bench in rural Thailand. 3 guys in a pickup truck came up. They wrestled her to the ground. They put a needle in her arm. And when she woke up, she'd been knocked out with this narcotic agent. She was in a slave trading camp on the Thailand-Burmese border, where buyers from the brothels the world over would come to buy girls from the age of 0, like babies, up to about 12 or 13, which was her age at the time. And for sport, the guards would line the kids up and just start executing them. They would go down the line, laying guns on temples. And I'll never forget, she came into my office one day and she said, hey, I got your computer talking to your printer. And I said, great. And then she didn't leave. She started rearranging the stuff on my desk, and I just stayed quiet, and she told me the story. And she said, so they were executing the girls next to me, and I was standing in line, and I hated how the girls would drop to their knees and wrestle for the gun and beg for their lives. I hated that. She had such disdain in her voice. And I said, so what did you do when the guards got to you? And she said, I stood up and I reached out my hand and I told the guard, you give me that gun, I'll shoot myself. I don't want to live like this anymore. And the owner of the camp had been walking by, and he overheard her, and he said, you follow me. And he brought her into his office, sat her down across the desk, and said, you know what? I've been doing this for 20 years. And every person in the final moment, I don't care how tough and strong you are, everybody will beg for their life when they've got a gun at their temple that's about to go off. And you didn't, and I want to know why. And she looked at that guy and she said, she stood up, reached out her hand. She said, I know you have a gun in that desk right there. Give it to me, and I'll tell you what I told the guard outside. I don't want to live like this anymore. I'll shoot myself. And he leaned back in his chair and he rocked back and forth a couple times, and he goes, get out of here. You're free to go. That was her first escape. She got re-trafficked again as a vulnerable youth in Thailand. And the second time, they made her a runner for I think it was the Yakuza Mafia. And she told me that she literally would take girls to warehouses who had spoken out or tried to escape, and they would set them on fire with gasoline and burn them. That is what you get for speaking out in Asia. That is what you get for running to the nearest cop who's actually working for the brothel and trying to say, save me. And so, in answer to your question, is there child sacrifice in a systemic way in Southeast Asia? Hell yeah, there is. Not in the culturally weird Masonic whatever way that we see it here, but in an equally devastating and very, very wrong and unjust way. And we need to do better in Asia and right here in LA in eradicating all of it. This is not the future our youth deserve at all.
There aren't words for that story. I was trying to fight back tears as you're telling me, because no human should have to endure that once, let alone twice. What's the personal toll that this takes on you? I mean, doing this work and seeing these things that no human should have to endure or see, witness, be a party to, how does that affect you and then by extension your family?
Yeah. I don't go there a lot because it's hard to get work done when you're crying. But I can tell you, I stayed quiet when the girl was telling me those stories. And part of my brain thought, oh my God, she's got to be lying to me. This can't be real. And then inside my own head, I slapped myself and I said, how dare you for a second disbelieve the victim? She's giving you date, time, place. The reason she's giving you the other intel during the day that is trustworthy is because she did live this. But it's human nature to just want to go, maybe they're wrong, maybe they're lying. And I remember I kept my face the way my therapist throughout the years has kept her face, very engaged, very calm, very good listening, active listening skills. And I let her tell her story, and she went to leave at the end, and she hit the door jamb. And I called out her name. We'll call her Jenny for the story. I said, hey, Jenny. And she looked back over. So she was 17 when she was working. She looked back over her shoulder, and I said, you did good. And she said, what? I said, you did good. And this child, very hard-boiled child, but a child nonetheless, threw me a smile I have never seen the likes of. She lit up that room. I don't think she had ever heard, ever, from anybody that she'd done good. I said, you survived something that nobody walks out of, not once, but twice, through your wits and your bravery. And don't ever forget that. You got this. You're a good person. You're doing good work, and don't you ever forget it. And people need to be positively validated for everything. You know, if the McDonald's guy gets your orders right, I don't go to McDonald's, but say thank you. I mean, that's a miracle these days. When some kid at a cashier gets the order right, say thank you. Tell them they've done good. People, all of us, none of us hear it enough. You know, it takes so little time to positively acknowledge somebody, and it's life-changing, right? It's just life-changing. But I can tell you, I waited for her to go back out to her cubicle, and I went down the hall and into the ladies' room, and I threw up 3 times. Mm. And later that night, I had my undercover actual former SWAT team guy from New York who was Thai, and he said, here's a thumb drive, or it was actually a thing of CD. And I said, what's on it? And he goes, watch it when you're back at the hotel. And I said, what's on it? And he goes, you'll see. And I'm like, great. So I took it on Friday. I didn't look at it. Saturday, I didn't look at it. Sunday, I'm talking to my daughter who's 8, and they're reading bedtime stories because it's 15 hours ahead in Asia. So it's my husband, and he's Zooming on the phone, and they're laying in bed, and he's got my daughter in his armpit, and they're like this, and I'm being part of story time, and, you know, good night moon and whatever. And I get done saying goodnight to her on my laptop. So that was the image I had seen from my husband's cell phone like I am with you on Zoom. And I thought, well, it's time to, before I go into the office, it's time to load up that CD. I can't procrastinate anymore. And I just ordered room service too at the hotel. And I load up the CD, and it is first person imagery that our law enforcement in Bangkok had taken off of a Japanese sex tourist who had attached a GoPro to his forehead and filmed himself raping 2 7-year-olds. So, and the angle that he was filming at was phase. So I am now seeing, I had just erased my daughter's screen, and 1 second later, I now have a little girl who's Asian, not white, same age as my daughter, same position on the bed. But instead of my husband cradling her, I've got, a Japanese sex tourist raping her. And then the doorbell to my room rings, and I forget that I have this up, and I stand up, trying not to throw up. And I go, and oh shit, it looks like I have porn on my laptop. And I go back, and I mute my screen, and then I open the door, and the guy comes in with the tray and gives me my breakfast or dinner or whatever it was. But I can tell you it is a minimum 23-hour flight back from Thailand, because there's no direct flight. You have to go through Hong Kong or Seoul or China somewhere. And on a long flight with bad layovers, you're at 33 hours. And there are more than one flight I can recall where I just silently cried the whole way home. The beauty of that long flight is you kind of get to purge it out of your system, and you can get home and you can hug your kid and kiss your kid and say, thank God, and there, but for the grace of God, go me and mine. If I had been born in Cambodia, that could have been my child. So we are very lucky to live the lives we live, and you don't really realize that until you walk a mile in a Southeast Asian brothel like we do when we go do the work. The worst day in Compton for the hardest hit person here is a rainbow and unicorn day compared to the lives of some of the people that I've seen in Southeast Asia. And we should be thankful of that. And we should do our ever-loving best, including using all of our time and money and resources to preserve the freedom that we have that is under attack here in America. Because let me tell you, folks, I don't know a single damn person who looks to immigrate into North Korea or into the red light jihadi district that I just described for you, or into Cuba. There are people jumping on rafts to this day who are trying to get to Florida, trying to get to the Miracle Center, because that's how bad it is when you let communism take over. The countries I work in are communist. The reason the parents sell their kids to the brothel is because if they don't, that child will starve. So as tempting as it is to demonize these mothers who sell their 7-year-old to a brothel, let me ask you, is it any better to not sell your baby and watch her starve along with every other kid in your family? Probably not. These are not bad parents. These are parents whose back's against the wall, and you and I can't even envision the life circumstances that they face on a daily basis. We need to solve the poverty problem. We need to solve the demand problem. Teach your boy, you don't buy people for anything, let alone for sex. And by golly, we need to preserve freedom here, because we are the last hope for the world. If we lose America, it's not like South Dakota and Sweden and Ecuador are going to come to our rescue.
I feel like that's the perfect way to end this. Now, for everybody that wants to follow the work that you're doing at the moment, all the freedom fighting, what's the website they can go to?
Good question. Thanks for asking. I always forget to plug myself because I get so excited about the topics I'd like to talk about. It is freedomfighternation.org. Again, that is freedomfighternation.org. You can also text the word freedom to 53445. Can I ask your indulgence for another 2 minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're going to win this war. We're going to win the human trafficking war. And I know we're going to win it, because never yet has the human race done itself in. We have not Darwined ourselves out of existence yet. One of the main ways that we're going to win it is by being in control of our own emotions. Nobody, now that you're an adult, controls your emotions but you. You have a duty to your kids, your husband, and most importantly, yourself, to wake up active. And if you're depressed, you're not active. Go outside, get some vitamin D, and read about studies like the one I'm going to tell you. There was a guy by the name of Carl Richter who was studying rats, and he wanted to figure out how long they could swim in a vat of water before they drowned. So he took his lab rats and he threw them into these barrels full of water. And on average, the rat would paddle for about 15 minutes before it would sink and drown. Very sad. It gets better. I promise the study gets better. And he thought, wow, I really thought that they'd swim longer than 15 minutes, but these are my lab rats. They're fat, they're lazy. They get fed 2 square meals a day and their water and their cage is cleaned by my lab assistant. I'm going to go get me some wild rats. Surely the wild rats who are, strong and escaping humans all day and conniving, surely they'll swim longer. So he gets some nice wild rats in there. He throws them into the drink, and they perform less well. They swim less long than the lab rats. And now the experiment guy is completely confused. He's like, how come my fat, lazy lab rats are outperforming the Christopher Columbus ship wild rats? This doesn't make any sense. And then it occurs to him that just maybe it's because the lab rats do have a human cleaning their cage, and they think maybe the human's going to rescue me. And it gave them the hope to swim a little longer than the wild rats. So he puts the hypothesis to the test. He throws a new set of lab rats into the water, and right about minute 15, when once again they're about to give up the ghost and sink down, he plucks them out of the water by their little lab rat tail, and he towels off their little lab rat head, and he says, "You're such a good lab rat. You're so strong. You're so able. You got this." And then he throws them back in right away, back into the drink. But he is now positively reinforced in their brain that yes, there's a human on duty that day, and yes, hope is possible of a rescue because it just happened once, right? And the memory is right there. And the question is the lab rat going to swim longer the second time because he has hope now that's been positively, reenacted right there? Or is he going to swim less long? Because let's face it, he just ran a marathon and almost drowned and went to full muscle fatigue. And it's not like people usually run a second marathon right after the first faster, right? So he didn't know what to expect. But I'll cut to the chase. When he threw the rats right back in the drink again for the second time, they actually swam longer. They swam for 3 days.
3 days.
3 days. They went from swimming 15 minutes on a second repeat, where physics would say they should actually swim probably only 10 minutes because they just exhausted all the glycogen stores in their muscles and they're at muscle failure. And not only did they swim less long or the same length of time, they swam longer. And not only that, they swam thousands of % of time longer, 3 days. That is the power of hope. Never doubt that a small group of concerned citizens can change the world, said Margaret Mead, for indeed, we are the only ones who ever have. So yes, you can find me at freedomfighternation.org, but in the meantime, until you see me at the next event, go fight your corner. We need more fighters out there. Never give up hope. It's not over till the fat lady sings. She's not singing. We're starting to win this war. We are going to win it, and we're going to win it that much faster if everybody joins us and gets active. So thank you so much for the time today, Natalie, and for being on your show. The more people we can reach, the easier our job is. And so I'm grateful for the microphone and your time. And I can't wait to see you again at some point in the future.
Leigh Dundas, you are an inspiration, and I swear you're the Energizer Bunny. You never, ever stop. Thank you so much for all that you do, and thank you for your time today.
It was a pleasure. I'll catch you down the road. Take care, my dear.